Welcome to another episode of the Super Dynasty Bros podcast, where we level up your fantasy game. My name is Ben, and I am joined by my co-host Austin over here. Welcome back, Austin.
Thanks, Ben. Excited to dig into some wide receivers today.
Yeah, so it's going to be a fun one. We reviewed the rookie wide receiver class a couple weeks ago, and this time we're coming at you with the 2025 rookie wide receivers. And we went up and down the class, and there was just actually a lot to talk about. I think a lot of people are really underplaying this class, saying that it's not very exciting. It's not as good as the 2024 class, which is true. It's the 2024 class, as I've said in many different places, whether it's Discord, through our YouTube channel, or through TikTok, is a unicorn. It's not to be repeated again for a decent amount of time. And I still think this rookie class has a lot to hold, a candle to hold in general to the depth of this class. Austin, what were your thoughts when you were reviewing the class?
Yeah, so I agree completely. I think that last year you saw a a one of a kind wide receiver class. I think this year you're saying that with the running back class. But the difference is I think last year's running back class was really bad, and I think it will continue to be that way. We might get one or two good ones out of it. But I don't think it's the same for the wide receiver class this year. So I think that they're actually, even though it's an extremely strong running back class, the wide receiver class is not terrible. It's not top heavy. I think there's maybe one or two guys that are like elite studs, but there's a lot of depth in this wide receiver class. Even when we were just kind of debating, should we talk about just 10 guys? We ended up coming up with about 14 that we were like, we need to talk about all these guys. So that's why we're going to be going through them that many today.
Yeah. So I think it's only natural to start off with the big man from Arizona.
Yes. So Ted McMillan, I think, is the pretty clear wide receiver one. I think it's kind of become trendy in recent weeks to sort of knock on him. He was the guy that everybody kind of talked about as a pretty much the consensus 102 when you do mocks early in the offseason. It seems like he's fallen some to 103, 104. I've seen him go like 105, 106 in some mocks. But I think it's just kind of people are going to nitpick the top guys. I do think there's a chance that he slides further than expected in the NFL draft. Because initially it was like he was a lock for the top 10, but it seems like he's being mocked more in the middle of the first now. But I think that there's still a chance he does go to one of those top spots, 4, 5, 6, New England, Jacksonville, Las Vegas. And if he does, I think that all of a sudden that changes things, and I think he is the pretty clear 102 in this class. But he's 6'5", 212 pounds. The guy is a jump ball machine, contested catches all over the place. He played in, honestly, not a great offense, not great quarterback play, but he elevated that team. Some of the comparisons I see are sort of Mike Evans, Drake London. Those are two that I keep seeing, and I think those are good comparisons. I think that he's the guy that can really be a strong X on really any team, and I see some open field speed too. Like, it's not like he's just a big lumbering guy, and freak athlete. His 2023, he had 90 catches for 1402 and 10 touchdowns. And then his 2024, I guess, was a slight regression, but really pretty consistent. 84 catches, 19 yards, and 8 touchdowns. Again, on a very mediocre Arizona team, he still was able to make plays. And we've talked about other guys like Ollie Gordon last week. We'll talk about Luther Burden a bit later on teams that just weren't like dynamic offenses and how their numbers got hit a little bit. But Tet was able to stay pretty consistent even in a pretty weak offense in 2024. So there's a lot to like there. He's big, he's fast, he's strong. He just has all of the components that you look for in an NFL receiver. And I think if somebody I think Las Vegas is a perfect landing spot for him. You got Chip Kelly now is the offensive coordinator there. They brought in Geno Smith, who likes to sling it around. You got Brock Bowers to take away some of those short targets, take some of the pressure off. I think that would be a good landing spot. I think New England would be a good landing spot as the number one receiver for Drake May. That could be a very fun landing spot. And I think even Jacksonville, like we talked about, opposite Brian Thomas. Can you imagine that combo?
Oh, yeah.
That would give defenses nightmares. So, yeah, I really like Tet. I do think that he'll end up getting drafted in a spot where he'll be no lower than the 103 in most rookie drafts. It depends on whether, probably, if one of those running backs gets really good round one capital, we might see maybe O'Marion Hampton end up too, but it depends. But I still really like Tat, and I have him ranked as my number two overall player and a pretty clear cut wide receiver one in this class.
Yeah, I mean, I think like you even said, it is at this point kind of trendy to just downplay Tet and just try to put somebody above him. And I don't think I don't know that I agree that it's as clear cut. I think he is the wide receiver one of this class right now. I think it's close between like the four guys that are going to go possibly in the first round. Um, that they all have the potential to end up at the number one, but I do think Tet has
Yeah.
right now the safest odds to end up number one, unless there's another guy we're going to talk about later who you're going to bring up that has a ceiling that's a little bit capped right now. But I think the thing that I've seen with Ted is that some people try to make the argument that he would have been like somewhere in the top three in the class last year, and I think going back to our previous argument, that's just not true with Marv Neighbors, BTJ, with Rome Odunze. I think him and Rome are fairly close. He probably clears Rome a little bit, but yeah, I mean, Tet is the 101. Had he come out last year, it would not probably be that way, but he entered in a much weaker wide receiver class this year. My next guy that we're going to talk about is, well, you mentioned it earlier, but Luther Burden, junior out of Missouri. And the thing with Luther is that he was viewed as kind of almost the consensus wide receiver one coming into this season, just based off of his production in 2023. So Luther Burden was a five-star recruit coming out of high school, number two receiver in his class, and number 17 overall player coming out in his class that year. Played as all 13 games as a freshman, started 10 games that season, and had a pretty good showing for a true freshman. But really, his breakout season was his following year as a sophomore, when he had put up a stat line of 6 receptions, 1,212 receiving yards, and 9 touchdowns that year. He was a Bletnikoff semifinalist, second team All American, and first team All SEC. And he was, like I said, he was coming out as potentially the wide receiver one of this class coming in before this season played out. But Missouri was not a great team this last year. They went from a 10-2 team that won a bowl game the previous year to not being great at all because Brady Cook got hurt. Their running game was not great at all. And so Luther Burden took really the hit off of his season based off that. And I do think that if he would have transferred, we might be having a different conversation. But he did decide to stay with Missouri and keep playing with them. So this year, the stat line was not as beautiful. It was 61 receptions, 676 receiving yards, and 6 touchdowns. And he did have a little bit of a rushing line of 9 carries and 115 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. But I don't think it really showed the potential of what Luther Burden is. He is an electric player, as we have talked about privately, Austin. I mean, the guy is a yak monster. He has great ball skills and is an elite separator. He's got excellent speed to be able to get off the snap quickly. And, basically, Missouri ran a really basic route tree for him. But the thing that I found interesting when I was researching Luther Burden was that Missouri and their head coach with Eliyahu Drinkwitz basically ran him out of the slot. And interestingly, with Missouri, their slot receiver is the same as what an X receiver would be, their primary receiver. And so they ran pretty basic routes, considering really a lot of short routes, running a lot of Luther out of the backfield. And I really don't think that it showed a lot of Luther Burden's downfield, kind of on the outside numbers dominance that he can have in the NFL. I think once he gets to the NFL, there's a possibility that he could translate and be able to make that push towards being a more dominant alpha wide receiver. But I think right now we just don't know enough about Luther Burden's ability based off of Missouri's offense that we see a great route runner. We see a guy who can catch the ball and be able to make plays I mean, I've seen comps to Diet Neighbors and Debo Samuel with a little bit of mix of Rashee Rice. And so I get excited about a player like Luther Burden, but I think there are some question marks in his game that are kind of holding us back from putting him above Ted
I
McMillan.
agree on Burden. I think you gave him some good comps there, and just the way he's able to make plays after the catch is really impressive. I think that they were able to, he had very low depth of target. He was very much like a at the line of scrimmage guy, a lot of screen passes, a lot of short passes, but he made a lot of those catches. And I think the way they used him is kind of similar to what we see from some of the top guys in the NFL, like Jamar Chase and CeeDee Lamb,
Yeah.
where they're just finding ways to get him the ball and just, hoping something good happens. And if he gets into an offense where they're willing to use him um, like that and really feature him in the offense, I think there's a lot of potential for him to be a star in this league. And I really like Burden. And to me, I think he's the wide receiver too. I think he's got much higher upside than Igbuka, and I still think he's got a pretty solid floor. Now, obviously, a lot is going to depend on the landing spot and who invests in him, but I really like his prospect profile.
Yeah, I mean, even pointing back to what you just said, like the average depth of target or A dot for him was like eight something yards last year, which is not
Yeah,
great at all. And so I think that has more to say about Missouri's offense than what it does about Luther
right.
Burden's talent.
It was more by design, and so I think it's almost you can't really even hold it against him. That was just kind of the way their offense was designed. Um, Now, obviously, if in the NFL he's only going to have 600 yards a season, he's probably going to be a bust. But we're hoping that he gets involved in the better offense and the better quarterback than he had last year at Missouri.
100%. So you're going to talk about the unit.
Yes. So this guy, Travis Hunter, I think if they announced today that he was going to be a full-time wide receiver in the NFL, I think we'd be having a spirited debate between him and Ashton Jeanty for the 101. Not even just him and Tet for wide receivers, but I think we'd be having the Heisman argument carrying over into the draft season. But the problem is, I just don't think that's going to happen. It seems like a lot of people are really focusing on the defensive back portion, and then he'll be a wide receiver in packages. But man, this guy, if he even in a package situation, or even if there's a chance that he ends up being more featured as a wide receiver, he may be worth a shot in your rookie drafts. I mean, this guy is an absolute unicorn. Some of these catches, if you watch his highlight reels, are unbelievable. I mean, there's only one player in college football that could have made them, and he's making them. I think he's the best pure talent in this class. He's a playmaker in big spots. He makes catches, fourth down plays. Anytime, Colorado needed him to make a big play, he made it on both sides of the ball, really. It's definitely a riskier pick, like we said. But to me, if you're a team that you won the championship last year and you've got the 112, maybe take a shot there. And really anywhere in the second round, I think you're looking at it's worth a shot.
Mm-hmm.
There's a pretty high percentage of bust rate for second round rookie picks, and so if he does bust, it's just like most of your second round rookie picks. But if he breaks out, that he has the potential to be, if he actually gets a chance to be a wide receiver full time, he has a chance to be like Jefferson Lamb Chase. He has a chance to be like in the elites in the NFL. I mean, he had a lot of scouts saying that they see Travis Hunter as a Hall of Fame talent, and so we'll see. I mean, if he ends up going somewhere like New England, for instance, that like really needs a wide receiver, really needs a playmaker for their quarterback, you might see him play a little more than expected at wide receiver, and he can make the most of those touches and have a massive season. There's some similarities I see in his wide receiver game. Now, obviously, he's bigger than this guy, but kind of to Devontae Smith, who was actually the last wide receiver before him to win the Heisman Trophy. Just the way he's able to take over games in big spots, elusiveness, and just making unbelievable catches. So I think that he's a guy that can, if he gets in the right system that wants to use him on offense, he could be the steal of this draft. And we could be saying, like, how in the world did this guy, draft him at 204? And now he's a second round startup pick next year. I think that's a potential that can happen. Or it could be he's a total gadget player, and every time you start him, he doesn't score any points, and when he's on your bench, he scores 25. But but we'll see how it goes, and that's why he's one of the most interesting players in this draft. But I think once you get at the end of the first or into the second round, I think it's worth a shot.
Yeah. And I think I've been seeing some stuff in the news, like they've been talking to NFL scouts, and many of them have said it's like it's a waste to see a player like this and only use him for his defensive abilities. Like you have to be able
Yeah,
to use him on both sides of the ball and really optimize the kind of player that he is. And I've been actually seeing some comps to CeeDee Lamb, your guy in Dallas, and
yeah,
I think that's pretty true. Like Travis Hunter has a ceiling to be a top three wide receiver if he was to play,
yes,
as we're saying, with the level of production that he would have to have playing at the wide receiver position. So I
yeah.
like him at like that one the third overall wide receiver right now. But like if absolutely if he ends up having more production than we expect, he is definitely over Tet.
Yeah. I think at this point, just with the risk, I probably would take Tat, Burden, Igbuka, and maybe Golden over him. But I do think that, if there's any inkling on draft day that the team drafting him plans to use him even 50% of snaps, he's a first round rookie pick.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. So talking about Emeka Egbuka, and I had a lot of fun watching the tape on Egbuka. It's funny as a Michigan fan, I just want to poo-poo on any of the Ohio State players I can, and I can see all of the negatives of Egbuka, basically just being not this extremely athletic guy who is
Yeah.
he's this high floor, but we don't expect a high ceiling out of Igbuka. But
Hmm.
I think you have to take Igbuka for what he is, and he's going to be a first round talent as a wide receiver. There were some interesting things that I found out about Igbuka through the process of researching him and looking into his tape and looking into the analytics. But Igbuka was actually the number one wide receiver coming out of his class, rated as a 5-star prospect, rated over Marvin Harrison Jr. that year. He was also a dual sport athlete with baseball, and actually, it was a crazy year that he had in his junior year in high school, where he had 83 catches, 1,600 yards, and 25 touchdowns. It's insane, and so people are just claiming that he is not this potential first round talent. That's a joke. I do think he is just like Luther Burden, a top 20, top 25 NFL draft expected prospect. And crazy fact is, him and Marvin Harrison are the only two OSU receivers to record 1,000 yard season, 1,000 yard seasons.
Hmm.
He's also the all-time leader in receptions and receiving yards at Ohio State. Um, and yeah, his breakout year was his sophomore year. That year he had caught 74 receptions for 1151 receiving yards and 10 touchdowns. Injuries had hampered his junior season, so really he wasn't on the field as much, and I think
Yeah.
hit total somewhere over 400 yards. So you got to really knock that off of his
Yeah.
total prospect in his case. But his senior season had a strong finish, being on the national championship team with 81 receptions, 1,011 receiving yards, and 10 touchdowns that year. So a much better year coming in. This was a case of him making the right decision of staying back and having another year at Ohio State to make sure that he could end up having the best draft capital. Because again, this is another receiver just like Tet, where if he had come out a year before, we're not even talking about him as the top 5 receiver in that class. Versus now, we're talking about him being a top 3 receiver in the 2025 class. So, for him, he creates separation consistently, but he's also a guy that can win underneath at the catch point. He works best in drags and outruns, but can also be a downfield threat. And he displays fluidity after the catch and short area quickness. He tracks the ball really well and has good ball skills. And one of his things is that he wins before and after the catch. The one thing that was a little bit disappointing, I think, but a lot of people, they might have wanted to expect out of him, but you can't really expect it out of him. I knew he wasn't really a super athletic guy, not to the level of some of the other guys we're going to talk about, but he had this 8.93 RAS score, which is pretty good. It's not breaking, but again, it's respectable, and I think that that's something that you have to take with Emeka Egbuka is that he is going to be the reception kind of receiver. He gives me the comps of JSN, Amon-Ra St. Brown, a lot of those slot receivers. So you kind of know what you're getting, but also at the same time, we know that we can get a guy who can be good on the outside as well, potentially if they line him up there and be able to run down the field as well along the numbers.
Yeah, it's funny you brought up JSN because like I almost felt like I was getting deja vu watching Ibuka's film versus when JSN was coming out. Just
Yeah, for sure.
very similar type of player. Honestly, even like Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, there was some similarities there too. Like those seems like those Ohio State guys. Harrison obviously is a little bit of a different breed,
Yeah.
but they've had like a lot of just very solid, consistent, I guess somewhat boring receivers. But if you think back to the class, like the Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave class, they were kind of the boring receivers. People were really excited about Treylon Burks and Drake London. And obviously Drake London's turned out okay, but like Burks was just this, huge physical beast. Everyone's like, he's just the can't miss prospect. And, Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave were kind of more solid, consistent. Um, the numbers weren't huge, but it just seems like Ohio State churns out very consistent receivers. I like Ibuka a lot. I think, going into last year, he was expected to be like right there with that elite class of wide receivers. I think he was kind of talked about in that, with Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors and those guys. But then with the injuries and stuff, by the end of the season, it was kind of like, oh, okay, well, he's more of the second tier there. This is why I think it's smart that he did come back, had a good season this past year, and I think he's primed. Looks like he'll be a first round pick, and if he is a first round pick, then he's a good, solid, safe first round rookie pick. And he's the guy that I think immediately will put himself in that tier with the Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers, kind of that tier of receiver where it's like just a solid guy. Don't expect him to become a wide receiver one for your team, but a solid wide receiver two or three that you can slot in and count on to be a consistent producer. I fully expect that. He's a good safe floor pick, but he does have some ceiling too, depending on where he ends up.
Yeah. There's two landing spots for me that are like extremely exciting. Houston and Seattle. And Seattle has the 18th pick. And I get a strong feeling that like if a receiver like Burden or Egbuka is there, they take him. And man, what a pairing that would be of seeing JSN and Egbuka back on the same team again.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. That was, I mean, Agbuka probably had his best season as a college player when he was on the same team with JSN.
Oh
Was
yeah.
at 22, right? Yeah, and so yeah, I mean, people would say they can't make it work because they're similar players, but we've seen them do it in college. So I definitely think, and we know that Sam Darnold is capable of being a good volume passer, if nothing else, right? So I think that both of those guys have shown they have the ability to catch the easy stuff over the middle and the deep balls. But I definitely think that it could be something where if he's on that team, could definitely contribute. I love the Houston pairing. Obviously, CJ Stroud would be very interesting. I think he would be a good complement to Nico Collins. There's a couple good spots for Ibuka. All right, I'm going to move now into Matthew Golden. I feel like he's been one of the more polarizing prospects. I think there was a lot of love for him early on, and then as the hype kind of built, I think there's been more of a pushback of, I guess, hate towards him. I don't know. I don't really know why. I think part of it is that his college production was not. It didn't jump off the page at you. He never had an 1,000-yard season. Last year at 58 catches, 987 yards, 9 touchdowns. Very solid. But it's a little bit deceiving because he wasn't as featured in the offense at the beginning of the year. The offense went more through Isaiah Bond at the beginning, but in the second half, he really came on. He had two of his biggest games towards the end of the year, the Georgia and Arizona State games. The Georgia game in the SEC Championship, the Arizona State game in the playoffs. He was 8 for 162 in the Georgia game and 7 for 149 in a touchdown, which was that game-winning fourth down touchdown against Arizona State. Also, just watching his film, his ability to run routes is incredible. He had a lot of deep routes where he was wide open, and when Ewers just completely missed him or didn't see him, don't want to rip on Ewers too much, but it just seems like there was so much meat left on the bone when you watch his film. Even some of his like highlight deep ball catches was him turning around and running back to the ball because he just like it was outrunning. He was basically outrunning the pass, and he had to turn around and make an acrobatic catch when if he had hit him in stride, it would have been a touchdown. So obviously, when we get to quarterbacks, we can talk about Ewers and his limitations. But for me, I think the stats don't really tell the whole story with Golden. I think he's a guy that's going to be. I mean, obviously the 4.29 at the combine, the speed. Um, there's just a lot to like with him. He became the featured player on Texas during the second half of the year. We'll talk more about Bond later, but Bond basically disappeared in the second half, and Golden was their clear elite number one guy. And I think there's a lot of potential for him to be, this year's Xavier Worthy, where if he gets in the right system. Obviously, Worthy had some ups and downs, and now who knows what's going on with his legal problems. But towards the second half of the year and in the playoffs, it's like, well, this guy's the real deal. And I think we're going to see something pretty similar from Golden this year. And all signs are pointing the NFL scouts really like him, and that he may end up in the first round. And if he's in the first round, especially the back half of the first round, with teams that are going to want him, good offenses that are going to want to make him a key contributor right away. I've seen Washington mocked a bunch. Man, I think this could really elevate him where he's in the conversation behind Tat as in the wide receiver 2 overall conversation in this class.
Yeah, I think like my lowest landing spot for him would still end up being like early day 2 in the second round.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
absolutely a lot of hype about putting him up in the first round right now.
hmm yeah,
So
agree.
yeah, I really like Matthew Golden as a prospect. I'm a little bit higher on him than I think the consensus is because I do think, like you said, there is a lot of polarization with him, but I'm honestly on the side of hyping him up and being kind of on that hype train with him. So I like that, Austin. I'm going to talk a little bit about a guy who he is also polarizing in a different way that it's just everybody wants to find the next Puka Nakua or Rasheed Rice because they go to these smaller schools and they try to take out some like these standout wide receivers. And Jalen Royals is a my guy for me. He's like the guy that I've been watching all off season so far with all the hype that's being posted everywhere. Watching his tape was a lot of fun. And there's a lot of what ifs, I think, of like what last season could have been had he played a full season. He ended up missing 5 games last season due to a foot injury, and he was on pace for 94 receptions, 1,430 yards, and 10 touchdowns last season. So the what ifs are there of like what could have been if he didn't get injured. But like even then, he's still a big body receiver that's an extremely like good yak threat. He was a 3-year player at Utah State. Ended up breaking out his sophomore season with 71 receptions and 1,080 receiving yards and 15 touchdowns. And then, he actually leads the FBS over the last 2 seasons with 10 catches of 50 plus yards over the last 2 seasons. So he's kind of that deep threat that you can definitely have for a guy like Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen to toss it to the end zone, or just a real deep threat for an offense to take the top off. His contested catch rate over the last 2 seasons was at a rate of 66%, 25 of 38 catches. And he's an extremely fast guy. He ran a 4.42 40 at the combine.
Yeah,
Extremely fast for a big body receiver. You don't really see that. And extremely versatile guy, can play in the slot or on the outside. And I've been seeing a lot of comps to Rasheed Rice or George Pickens, and a lot of people want him to be the Rasheed Rice 2.0. But I do see a lot of hype with Jalen Royals, and I've been seeing a lot of comps or not comps, but really mocks of seeing him going into the second round. I
yeah.
think between him and a receiver, some of the receivers we're going to talk about later, the combine really solidified their spot potentially going in the second round.
Yeah, there's a lot of day 2 talent in this class at wide receiver. I think it's going to be very interesting. It's hard to rank them right now until we see the landing spots because, I mean, if a guy like Royals ends up getting like high second round draft capital in a good position, I mean, I could see him going early in the second round of rookie drafts. Like I really like Royals a lot watching tape. I watch a lot of college football. I don't think I had seen a single Jalen Royals game his entire college career, and so but watching his film was really. I mean, it popped off the screen. He is clearly an elite player who's playing in a small school. So there's always going to be detractors saying, "Oh, he's not playing against as good a competition." But I mean, he was very, very dominant there, and I think
the only reason why a lot of us watched a lot of Mountain West last year was because of Ashton Genty.
right, right. That's true. That's true. Yeah. But yeah, I think so. Like he's a guy that I until recently was. I mean, I'd heard other people talk about him, but I hadn't seen it for myself. I think everybody else we talked about today, I watched a bunch in college, but yeah, Royals is a guy that I think has got a lot of potential. He's becoming kind of a darling among those, that are watching film, and I think the NFL scouts seem to be liking him. He gets higher and higher in mocks, and it'll be very interesting to see his landing spot.
For sure.
Yeah, a guy I'm definitely excited about. All right, so now I'm going to talk about another guy that started at a small school, but ended up playing at a big school. So Trey Harris. So this guy, started his career at Louisiana Tech, and then transferred to Ole Miss in 2023. 6'3", 210 pounds. Played at Ole Miss. Stop me if you've heard that before. I mean, I feel like the Ole Miss has these physical beasts at wide receiver almost every year. You can't help but see the comparisons to AJ Brown, DK Metcalf. I think the negative comparison would be, I don't want to keep railing on him too much, but he does have a little bit of Treylon Burks to him. So we'll see kind of which way that falls, whether he can translate his game to the NFL. He is very strong. That's one of the things that really stands out is just his ability to fight through coverage, his ability to get jump balls, we had one specific contested catch. I'm sure you've seen the highlight against LSU where he jumped through two defenders in the end zone. Absolutely one of the best catches of last year. He's not much of a speedster, 4.54, 40. But when you're a big guy that's playing on the outside that's expected to be a jump ball guy, you're not necessarily looking for elite speed. He's just a very consistent performer. I mean, 3 straight seasons of 50-plus catches, 900-plus yards, 7-plus touchdowns. Just 3 seasons in a row, very consistent. He had 10 touchdowns in 2022 at LA Tech. But really, there was no drop-off in his production against increased competition when he went to Ole Miss. Now, he played with a very good college quarterback. Jackson Dart, obviously, was great, but I think he had a great rapport with him. It seemed like they really worked well together. He's a little older. He's 23 years old, which sometimes can be a drawback. Just sort of taking a while to get to the point where he was NFL ready. But I think he's ready to produce right away. Honestly, watching his film and watching Tet McMillan's film, there's a lot of similarities. They play a very similar game. They have similar strengths. I think the thing that is hard to quantify is how much of that was just he was playing with an elite quarterback, and it does help a lot, whereas Tet really wasn't. So we'll see the landing spot. I think for me, the only question about Trey Harris is where does he end up? Where does he end up getting drafted? Because I've seen sometimes him fall into the 3rd, and I even saw one mock yesterday where he was in the 4th round. So if that happens, obviously there's some concerns about will he be able to get a chance to actually get good playing time. But if he ends up a 2nd round pick, he ends up in a good position. He's a guy I think is a smash draft in the early 2nd round.
Yeah.
And definitely excited about his potential. I think the only reason he's not really in the conversation with those elite guys is the fact that there's a lot of concerns over where he's actually going to get drafted in the NFL.
Yeah. And one of my favorite receivers in the NFL right now, he's been getting a lot of comps to, is Nico Collins. The size, the ability to make that catch of contested catches, it's great. It is, but that's the ceiling. We just there's definitely a floor there, and we just
right.
That depending on the draft capital, that all depends. Um,
Hmm.
yeah,
For sure.
so moving on to another polarizing, potential day two pick. This is coming from, a less, you know, renowned football school, but Alec Aomanor, just sophomore coming out of Stanford. He redshirted his freshman season, so he ended up coming out, playing in 2023 as his redshirt freshman season. Had 62 receptions, 1,013 receiving yards, and 6 touchdowns that year. He's actually the first Cardinal. This will just go to show how much of a non-football school Stanford is, but first Cardinals surpassed 1,000 yards since 2018. And the thing about Alec Aomanor is that he is a big body receiver that wins with physicality. So he's not very speedy. He's not very much of a yak threat, but he's kind of that guy that can go up again for a contested ball and come down with the ball. And he makes these great catches, including 2 years ago when he played against Colorado. And a lot of people will look back and say, like, that was his best game in college against Travis Hunter, setting a school record 294 yards that game. And
Weren't they down like 28-0 in that game or something like that and came
yeah, I
back?
mean, and I feel like
Yeah.
all of his 294 yards came in one half of a game. It was nuts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just, and I think that's the red flag that we have an issue with Alec Aomanor is, like, outside of that in that season, like, we didn't see so much. Like, I think last year was definitely a better year for him, where we saw a little bit more of his talent. But he had bad QB play throughout his time at Stanford. Ashton Daniels was actually the 85th QB in the FBS according to his QBR. And his season last year was 63 receptions, 831 receiving yards, and 6 touchdowns. He accelerates well down the field and wins on corner routes, but also works well on slant routes. He's got a good release against defensive backs with his hands and great ball tracking skills. And the great thing about him and his size is that he has a nice catch radius, so it helps with contested catches. He is actually a little bit faster than I gave him credit for. Actually, looking back at his combine, he ran a 4.44, and he actually scored very well overall on the RASC with a 9.56, hitting a 38.5 inch vert and 10-foot 7-inch broad jump. So he is an athletic guy. Like, he can make all of the catches that you probably want him to based off of his physicality. The only issue is that he just we just didn't see enough out of him at college. It just didn't. There was, again, a couple games here where he really flashed, and he was a track star in high school. So, like, again, he's showing you the speed there. But right now, I kind of have his comps being to a Keon Coleman, Michael Pittman type of receiver. Again, not exactly the guy that is going to break away, but he can definitely catch the ball and make plays as he needs to. Versus where I kind of see where his floor is, more of a Devontae Parker or Gabe Davis. So I'm excited about Alec Aomanor, but again, as we talked about with some of the other receivers, this just really depends on draft capital. And I think it's an exciting pick, but it really depends on where he ends up.
Yeah. No, he's a guy that I kind of thought we might see come back for one more year. Just the fact that he only played 2 years and was at Stanford and the stats weren't exactly popping off the page. So it's a bit in a class that I think is not as strong as other classes. I think maybe he saw a potential to get out there, and I think he's going to be mocked. He's been mocked pretty high. Like, he's been pretty consistently a day two pick.
Yeah.
But again, got to kind of see how the draft capital falls. Kind of staying on the topic, we've been on a bunch of these guys in a row, but another big, strong jump ball receiver is Jaden Higgins out of Ohio State. This guy is, I hate to keep doing this, but it's just like the ability to go up and catch jump balls. I mean, it's what really stands out. But I think the thing that kind of differentiates him from some of these other guys is consistency. He's not one of those guys where you're like, man, the ceiling's so high, but man, the floor falls out. He just was very consistent throughout his career. He started at Eastern Kentucky and transferred to Iowa State. Last year, these stats are very interesting. So he had 87 catches, 1183 yards, and 9 touchdowns. So pretty solid. He did not have a single game under 50 yards receiving. If you look at his box scores and you take typical PPR fantasy scoring. His lowest scoring game was 12.9 fantasy points, which was 6 catches for 69 yards. In all but 2 of his games, he either or, and sometimes both of these things, but he either had 100 yards or a touchdown in all but 2 games. Just very consistent performer across the board. Not the fastest guy, but considering a guy that's 6'4", 215, running a 4.47 is pretty fast for his size. And he played with another good receiver on his team that'll be an NFL receiver, which you'll talk about here in a minute. So it's not like he didn't have any target competition. He definitely did. And yeah, I think he's a guy that we keep saying this, but it's a lot about the draft capital. Where do these day 2 guys fall in? Like what positions do they fall into? But he's a guy I really like as someone. It's funny that you mentioned Michael Pittman because I see a lot of Michael Pittman and Higgins here. So I think that he's a guy I really like, and he's a guy that I noticed last year, just kind of watching college football, and I've kind of had on my radar. But really, digging into his film, I've started to really like him more, and I think he's risen up my rankings a little bit.
Yeah. You were the lucky one that got the chance because I think he right now is kind of a darling in the draft, kind of the draft season right now. We actually got the chance to talk about him last week when I was on with the Empire of the Elite and Chev, talking a little bit about Jaden Higgins and potential landing spots. And Chev was actually talking about a landing spot with Nico Collins in Houston, as we were just talking about potentially with some of the other receivers. But he's just another big physical body that can come down with the ball, and I love Higgins. He's going to be another day 2 guy, but we can't belabor the point. We can just continue to belabor the point. Like, draft capital is going to be huge with like really this middle tier of wide receivers. Like, I think the top 4 we know are going to end up in like the first round, with potentially Matthew Golden somewhere in the early day 2. But yeah, like what's really going to separate the rest of these guys is going to be draft capital and where they end up landing spots and who's throwing the ball to them. Everything with that is going to matter when it comes time to the NFL draft here next month.
I think the perfect example of that is last year, Lad McConkey. I mean, he was kind of talked about as middle of the second tier guy, not one of the guys that people were talking about much. And then as soon as he got drafted top of the second to the Chargers, all of a sudden he's the first round guy. And I think you'll have 1 or 2 guys like that where they're kind of mired in this big tier, but the second they get a good draft capital and a good landing spot, all of a sudden they bump up a tier and everybody gets really excited about them. So I'm very curious to see, who it ends up being here.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm going to talk about his teammate, and I think Jalen Noel has an argument in his own right for being. I really can't rank them one over the other. I think it's 1A, 1B in that situation. But Jalen Noel was a 3-star prospect out of high school, number 8th player in Missouri. So at that time he didn't really stand out as much as he did coming out of Iowa State. He had offers from Nebraska, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Kansas State besides Iowa State, and decided to go to Iowa State and play all 4 years there, eventually leaving as a senior. But as a true freshman, played in 13 games, had 3 starts, 39 receptions for 269 receiving yards, and still had a very modest true freshman season. Like, when you have a season like that as a true freshman, you are putting yourself out there and at least making it known that you are going to be something on that team for the seasons to come. In his 2023 season, that was his breakout season. He had 66 receptions for 820 receiving yards and 7 touchdowns. He was second team All Big 12 that year. And actually, over the last 2 seasons, he had basically was declared as a co-captain over the last 2 years. And to me, when I was watching a lot of interviews with him, he just has like this leadership role within the locker room that he had at Iowa State. He's a very well-spoken kid. He has a good head on his shoulders, and I think the IQ is really going to show from the interviews that he had with a lot of the NFL teams that he interviewed with. In the 2024 season, he had posted his career best stats with 80 receptions, 1194 receiving yards, and 9 touchdowns that year. He posted a 4.39 40 at the combine, a 41 and a
Yeah.
half inch vert, which was honestly for as small of a guy as he is, he's like 5'10, like 195 or something like that from what I had seen. And he posted 11 foot 2 inch broad jump, also again top three within the wide receivers, and mostly played in the slot in college, running 73% of the time out of the slot, and then 27% of the time playing out wide. He was a punt return, kick return specialist for Iowa State. Very versatile player. One of the things is he holds onto the ball with contact, separates well with good footwork, and can separate at all three levels. He wins in the short game, out routes, drag routes, slant routes, good short area quickness. He wins space off the snap, so he really can at least
Yeah.
use that acceleration well on the DBs. And he has good hands. He's not a big yak guy, but he extends well for his smaller frame. So I think when you're talking about another day two guy, it's Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel are right there, and I've seen a lot of comps for him, similar to Khalil Shakir, Josh Downs, and as well as
Yeah.
Darnell Mooney. I think those are
Can see that.
all perfect NFL comps, and if that's what you want on your NFL team is like a wide receiver too, Jalen Noel is the perfect prospect for that. At least as it's looking so far. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be a real test to see who ends up as the higher Iowa State drafted player because I think both of them
Yeah.
have their own argument right now.
It reminds me a bit of Jalen McMillan and Jalen Polk last year, where it was
Yeah,
kind of like which one of them is going to end up going higher. Obviously, McMillan's, at least from the rookie perspective, ended up being the much better player, but we'll see
he drafted
how
late.
it pans out. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But so the thing with Higgins and all that I think is really interesting is I like to see guys that can play alongside another good receiver that plays a completely different role. So you seen Higgins is the big guy, contested catch guy, Knowles smaller and probably the better route runner. But you just see sort of the way that they're able to still put up numbers while not being like a clear, the only guy getting targets. And I think that's that's the position that both of them are going to step into in the NFL. Neither one of them is going to be asked to be like the number one guy on their team, most likely. So just being able to see that they can have consistent production while not having to be a clear cut alpha, I think is a good sign for them being a pretty safe floor player. Um, I will say Sleeper needs to update ADP because every time I'm doing a rookie mock and getting it like late third ish, I'm like, where's Jalen Nolan? I have to scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll. He's way down there. But I think that as more people find out about him, especially if he ends up being a day two pick, I definitely think that will rise. But he is pretty low. Like you scroll past players that I don't even know who they are to find Jalen Nolan. So
Oh yeah, keep him
that's
down there.
something
You
that
know what, sleeper, keep him down.
that's true. That actually, yes, keep him down there. I'll be having a lot of Jalen Nolan.
Please, people sleep on him. So
So speaking of teammates, we're gonna go with a teammate of a guy I talked about earlier, Isaiah Bond. 5'11", 180 pounds. Um, Obviously, a lot of people talking about how he bragged about he was going to beat the combine record, and then he ended up with a disappointing 4.39, 40-yard dash, which I mean, for almost anyone's standards, is a very good 40 time. But just the fact that he was talking about running 4.2 and 4.1 and whatever. Um, but to me, there's a lot of holes in his game. He hasn't really put up impressive stats. He only had 34 catches last year, 540 yards, 5 touchdowns. I watched a bunch of his tape from 2023 at Alabama. I actually like his tape from 2023 much better than 2024. Now, some of that may come from the fact that it seemed like he had a better rapport with Jalen Milroe than he did with Ewers last year. Of course, everybody remembers his miracle play against Auburn. What was that, like 4th and 19 to win the game? But I see some good open field speed. In the first half of the season, he did some good things for Texas, but he basically just completely fell off in the second half. He did deal with some injuries here and there, but it just seemed like he just got outplayed by Matthew Golden, and Golden became kind of the main guy. Honestly, there's not like a ton that I love about his prospect profile. Um, if he gets a good landing spot, I could see him being a guy that you're comfortable taking in the third. He's obviously a very good athlete, highly recruited. He, is a guy that Alabama liked. Um, did pretty well at Texas last year, but just nothing that I really love when I watch Isaiah Bond. And now that I say that, maybe he'll end up being an elite NFL player, but I just don't really see anything that he does that really stands out to me. And I don't really see him getting mocked very high. I see him pretty routinely not being day two, and he ends up in day three. But if he does end up in day two and he's in a good spot, he might be worth a flyer. But obviously, I think at one time early in the offseason, people were kind of debating between Bond and Golden, and I think the Golden has really separated himself at this point.
Yeah. I think the thing with Bond that I see is just like the lack of production in all 3 years that he's played in college. Just like
Yeah,
nothing stands out.
yeah,
So, yeah, you're just gonna take the guy that actually did more on the field, especially during the playoffs, and then had a
yeah.
standout performance at the combine. Although, I think a lot of people are playing down Bond's performance at the combine just because of the fact that he came out and tried to be this showboaty guy of saying, I'm going to beat the record. It still ran a 4.41, but like people are looking at it like, you're not as fast as you thought you were.
Yeah.
Um, so to bring up another guy that like I think he's gonna fall out of the second of day two, but like could be at the tail end of day two, but probably at the early end of day three is the senior out of TCU, Jack Bash, and I think the thing with Jack Bash that I've been seeing a lot is people really want him, and they keep making these comps. I see them fairly often to Puka Nakua, and we just have to stop using this comp of like saying that every receiver that doesn't come out of an extremely good Power Five school that is like this sneaky player is Puka Nakua because we don't know that. Puka Nakua, we didn't. I mean, I think there were some people that really kind of saw a little bit coming out of BYU, but he was a unicorn. We're not going to
There's
put
only
Jack
one
Bash
Puka
in that
Nakua.
box. And I think if we are going to say, we're going to use the word unicorn again. If we're gonna put Jack Bash in that box, you're going to be disappointed. But I do think Jack Bash is a really good receiver. He's a big physical guy. And prior to 2024, he was limited in his production at LSU and TCU. Although oddly enough, in his freshman year was the leading receiver for LSU, which is just sad to say about the whole receiving core in general. That was before Jaden Daniels had come into town, and Malik Neighbors took over as the elite wide receiver that he was. Jack Bash is a great route runner. He's got great hands, and honestly, speaking of great hands, he had the best drop rate in college at 1.6%. So the guy catches everything coming his way. He can play inside and outside, but mostly played outside 71% of his routes last year. Had a 60, it's talking about contested catch again. 65% of contested catches uh, uh, caught last year. He's a zone menace, ranked seventh in FBS according to PFF. He's great with slant and corner routes. And he had a pretty good combine. He ended up having a 9.26 RAS score. Didn't perform in the 40, but what I saw online is from at least from the Senior Bowl, they had recorded a 4.55 40. So not exactly a fast guy, but he doesn't really do it with speed. His thing is all
Yeah,
physicality and being able to catch the ball coming his way. So
yeah,
I saw a lot of tape where he was in double coverage and he was able to be able to track the ball and be able to bring it down. So he's kind of that receiver that you want from that. I mean, he last year he had 62 receptions for 1,034 yards and 9 TDs. So he was productive last year. Just we didn't see it any year before that. You're taking a flyer out on a guy who's probably going to be a fourth rounder, hopefully at the end of the third round coming next month.
yeah.
But I do see, have seen the Puka Nakua comp. And again, I see shades of Puka Nakua. I'm not going to say he is Puka Nakua because it's just we can't say that at this point. And then I see the floor being potentially a Tim Patrick or a Gabe Davis.
Mhm. Oh, yeah, he obviously, I think he caught a lot of people's attention with his performance at the Senior Bowl, and he was one of the stars there. I like Besh a lot. I think that there's I think that there's some questions just about like where he's going to end up getting drafted. I did see one mock. I wish I could remember where it was, but I saw a mock yesterday that had him going in the second round to the Cowboys, which I think would be a great spot for him. Obviously, I think he is more often being mocked as a day three guy. But he does have a lot of skills that I think will translate well as I don't see him being obviously like a Puka Nacua level player, but I think he could be a good contributor that's, just a very solid wide receiver 2 or 3 in the NFL. And, if he gets in the right spot where he has an opportunity to really be the number 2 in a good offense, I think that, he's definitely a guy to watch.
Yeah.
All right, so the last guy I'm going to talk about today is Tez Johnson. It seems like I'm getting deja vu because we had, I feel like at this time last year, we had a very hyped up Oregon wide receiver that some people were mocking, very highly, and then just completely fell out of favor. And last year it was Troy Franklin. I saw Troy Franklin early in the offseason. He was being mocked in the first round a lot of times. And obviously completely fell off. I can't even, where did he end up getting drafted? Was it the fourth round?
Yeah.
Yeah, fourth round. Obviously Tez was never expected to be a first round pick, but there's been a lot of, there was a lot of hype early in the offseason. But really, anytime you're a guy that weighs 165 pounds, you've really got to stand out with your speed. And he ran a 4.51, which was actually slower than Higgins ran, and he weighs 60 pounds more. So, that's a little bit of a concern because you're looking for a guy at that size to survive in the NFL. You got to be a burner. And I do think watching more of his film, I definitely think he's a guy that's quicker than fast. He has like good twitch speed, and just very quick. Is able to be elusive, evade defenders. Could definitely be a big play weapon in the NFL. Obvious similarities to Tank Dell, just very similar sized guy. A lot of the same skill set. And he's had 10 touchdowns in the last 2 seasons. He had 1182 yards in 2023 and 898 in 2024. I do worry just without kind of that burner speed, how he's going to last in the NFL. I think there could be a lot of potential for injuries. And just how is he going to do against an NFL defense? Because he's not really going to be able to outrun people the same way he was able to in college. So he really needs to be in the right situation. He's obviously had really good QB play. Will he get that? In the NFL, will he get opportunities? I think there's a lot of question marks there. I liked him a lot more in the offseason, but now with all the all the other question marks combined with the fact that he's obviously ran a lot slower than expected, I expect him to probably be a day 3 guy, and he could end up being a guy like kind of like Roman Wilson was last year, where he just doesn't really get much of an opportunity to play. And at that point, once you have a rookie that doesn't play much, then they're basically worth nothing in Dynasty after that. So it's just, I don't really see the path. I think he might get in a situation where he ends up, sort of like Marvin Mims was, where it's just like he's just a big play guy, and he slowly works into more of a role, and then maybe this year he becomes more of a featured piece. So that's what he's kind of hoping for, is to get into an offense that uses him here and there, maybe uses him as a punt returner, and he has 1 or 2 big catches, shows potential, and gets more of a role next year.
Yeah.
But honestly, I don't see a ton of ceiling for Tez Johnson.
I don't see it for Tez Johnson. I think it might be the smallest recorded receiver at like 5'9", 156. So like prior to the combine, it was like I think he weighed in at like 165, and so then he came in at 156 and like shocked everybody, just like, whoa, this guy is small. And then
I was trying to be generous with the 165.
Yeah, I think 165 was the pre-combine measurement.
Right.
And then he came into the it was like 156, and everybody was just out. It's like, we're done. And then he runs the slow 40. It's like, you're not big, you're not fast. What are you? And so, I just think there's a lot of concerns there with how he's going to translate to the NFL, because at least Tank Dell is a little bit bigger and I think more talented than Tez Johnson, and faster. So there's a lot of concerns there. But who knows if he gets his shot? Maybe he gets just a flyer still being a fourth round
Yeah.
player, but gets an opportunity. Who knows? I mean, Troy
Yeah.
Franklin, even being a fourth round player, has gotten his opportunity just in a
Yeah.
very wide receiver star Denver. So and has
Yeah. Maybe have Denver draft him and just get the whole Oregon crew back together.
true, and then they get Terrence Ferguson. But
Yeah. There you go. Go with
um,
Bo next.
the last player I'm going to talk about today is Xavier Restrepo. And it was an exciting year for Miami last year. Cam Ward, of course, was headlining that team, and Restrepo was
Mhm.
the number one wide receiver on that offense. Restrepo is an exciting player. I think the one word that you can use to describe him is scrappy. He's got a lot of short area quickness. He didn't have a lot of production through his first 3 seasons, but last year really showed out. But he was a fifth year senior out of Miami. Breakout season was in 2023. Had 85 receptions for 1,092 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns. Had continued his dominance in 2024 for an even more efficient season with 69 receptions, 1127 receiving yards, and 11 touchdowns. He's got good footwork. He's a good route runner. Very high IQ player. He's really brilliant at finding the gaps in zone coverage. And he is a yak monster, so like he is really good at yards after the catch and really making DBs miss and being able to get those extra yards as he can. He's got a good acceleration after the catch, and he's a solid possession receiver. Ran last year 92% out of this. Actually, it was 2023. Ran 92% out of the slot. That's where he really acts best. So he's really best as a Z receiver. Um,
Hmm.
I there's not too much more I can say about Restrepo. I do think that hopefully he does end up sliding into the third round, but the other option is that he ends up being a day 3 pick, and I do think even if he ends up that way, I think he does have the talent that he could potentially have a shot in the NFL.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that he's pretty impressive on tape. But I do think it's kind of hard to watch his tape. Like I find myself getting distracted just watching Cam Ward when I'm watching Restrepo tape because some of the throws that Ward makes are incredible. But I mean he was there making big play after big play. I think in particular, if you watch back the highlights of the Cal game, they were down I think 25 points in the second half. And it was just like the entire second half is just Restrepo highlight reels of making huge third down catch, huge touchdown catch, huge catch to keep the drive alive, just over and over again. Like every time Miami needed a big play, every time Cam Ward needed someone to step up, it was Restrepo doing it. So I mean, there's definitely a lot to be said for a guy that Cam Ward put a lot of trust in. And there can be detractors saying like, well, Ward wasn't what the best quarterback in college football last year, and he really put him in those spots. But I mean, you even mentioned it technically Restrepo statistically had a better year in 2023, and that was with much shakier quarterback play. So he's shown that he can do it with multiple different quarterbacks. And yeah, I think there's a lot to like here. Um, but it doesn't seem like, at least as of now, the way things are being mocked and the way things are being talked about, that the NFL really is excited about Restrepo. Obviously, much like all these other guys we talked about, if he does get late day 2 capital, that could change things. But if he ends up day 3, it's more of a flyer. But he is a guy that of the kind of people outside of that kind of top 8 to 10, he is a guy that I like a little bit more than some of these other flyers. I think he has a better chance to, be an impact NFL player than maybe a guy like Johnson or Bond that we just talked about. But yeah,
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, there's guys that we're not going to talk about tonight. It's just
yeah,
too long of a list. Considering actually Jack Besh's teammate and Savion Williams and Kyle
hmm
Williams and Ty Felton and Ricky White and the list goes on. Like we can keep.
yeah. We got to mention the Ty Felton backflip.
Yeah, right. I mean, these guys, I think they're exciting. They could,
Mhm.
do much better in the draft than what we might think right now. But I think the guys that we talked about are really the top of the class. The cream of the crop being the first four that we mentioned, and then really kind of a nebulous group behind that of just. These are day 2, day 3 guys that are going to really flip
hmm
flop each other and play leapfrog until we find out where their draft capital is.
Yeah.
So
Very excited for the draft and kind of figuring out like once when we're watching day two of the draft, we're like, oh, that's where he went, that's where he went, and then just sort of like sorting out like where do these guys fit into a ranking? Who are we excited about? Who got the landing spot of death? Where there's like, are they ever going to get a chance to play? It's going to be very fun.
hundred
This is a fun
percent,
time of year.
100%. This has been a fun activity. This has been a fun
Yeah,
exercise of being able to take our level of tape even deeper and being able to serve our listeners to be able to tell them a little bit more about the prospects that we're looking into.
yeah,
Definitely as we start to kind of look towards the NFL draft next month, we're trying to figure out how we're going to be able to fit in QBs and tight ends. Although honestly, there's not as much to talk about with those compared to
yeah,
wide receivers or running backs. So to me, I'm like, do we just combine the two? But
yeah.
we still have yet to
We'll get it in
even
before the
cover
draft.
our listener league startup results and
Yes, I
eventually
want to do
going
that for
over
sure.
here soon enough to rookie draft. And so we've got a
Yep.
lot to talk about over the next month, and the Super Dynasty
Yeah.
Bros are continuing to go. Like we've been really hitting it up on the Discord. We've gotten a lot more members now who are interacting with each other and talking a lot of ball. Like we definitely created this partnership recently with Empire of the Elite where we've really formed a bond with these guys
Yeah.
between
Got some hardy
Fred
debates
and
going on.
Justin, and it's a lot of ball knowledge being spread.
Yeah, it's fun. It's
but
fun.
but it's a great time. We have a lot of people, we have a lot of listeners who enjoy what we're doing, and we enjoy what we're doing, and we're putting out a lot of good stuff. And this is honestly just for the fun of it, man, because I enjoy fantasy football and I enjoy this
Yeah.
off season right now. Like the draft season is a fun time. But Austin, I mean, what are your overall thoughts with the 2025 class?
Yeah, I think that the kind of the I don't know. The way that people were talking about the 2025 class during last season was like trade away your picks. Any 25 picks have, move them to 26 or 27. And I think that we're the closer and closer we get to the draft, I'm like, man, there's a lot of guys I want on my team. And so, on the teams where I don't have many 2025 picks, I'm definitely feeling like, man, I wish I had more. And on the teams where I have a lot of 2025 picks, I'm very excited. So
Yes,
I
yes,
do think there's, picks become more valuable as you get closer to the draft every year. And so, always remember that even though you're super excited about your 2025 picks, your league mates are also more excited about your 2025 picks. So sometimes this is a good time to sell picks on excitement. But there definitely is going to be, I think, a lot of guys that I do definitely think the draft is 15 to 20 guys deep of people that I think can really make an immediate impact. And so really the whole first round and the first half of the second round, I think is I think guys that can be consistent starters this year. And then there's just a lot of guys, a tier of another 15 to 20 players that are just very interesting. And if they get in the right landing spot, can be can be contributors. I think it's a very deep class. It's not as top heavy as last year, but it's very deep. Um, Quarterback is not as good as it's one of the weaker classes
yes.
we've seen in a little while. Wide receiver class is kind of average, but the RB class is super deep. The tight end class is pretty solid as well. Um, so I definitely think there's a lot to like in this class, and I'm excited to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, we look forward to this exciting season with all of you guys, and we'll definitely be posting more content here as the months kind of come along, and as the season changes, and especially as we start getting more towards training camp and everything else like that, more news coming our way. Like this whole free agency tracking has
Yeah.
been nuts. I mean, to
Wow.
see DK go to the Steelers and to see Sam Darnold go to the Seahawks, we kind of expected, but like really the first domino to fall was Geno Smith going to the Raiders. So
Yeah.
there's a lot that we're going to have to cover.
Justin Fields.
Justin Fields to the Jets. So
Yeah.
and that being said, I'm excited as a Garrett Wilson owner and as a Brees Hall owner. So
Yeah.
I mean, we could go all night, Austin. I really do think we we could keep
Yeah.
going, but I think this is a good point where we can reflect and look forward to our future as a show, and
Yeah.
I'm really excited for it. But yeah, I mean, I'm ready for all of our listeners to join us on the next one. You know.
Sounds good.
All
All
right.
right.
Have a good night, man.
You too.